garden. Today I'm going to do a big batch of sun-dried tomatoes. My two favorite types of tomatoes to dry are cherry for the sweetness and Roma for their moisture content. The Romas have very little moisture already in them, so they dry nice and quickly. Now the first thing we need to do is split them in half and remove the seeds. So if we look at this cherry, there's actually a little cleft at the top. You want to go perpendicular to that cleft. We're going to slice it right down the middle, and then we get a beautiful view of those seeds. Because if you cut right along with it, like this, the seeds are trapped behind a veil. So that you have to kind of squeeze through to get those seeds. So this is the perfect time to save your seeds. You want to pick your ripest fruit. So you could dry the seeds on a plate or ferment them all in a big batch like this. But we're really reducing that moisture content by removing the seeds. And I think they have a better flavor in the end. Put them face down on a paper towel to drain out a little bit of extra moisture. There's so much moisture in there. Watch what happens when we just blot one little cherry tomato. Look at all that juice. So that will take time to dry. That'll take another hour in the sun. Now if you have a really dry day, really nice sunny conditions, they can dry in as little as 1 day. But usually they take a couple days, so you want to bring them inside overnight so they don't rehydrate in that morning dew. And if it takes longer than a couple days, you want to bring them in and just finish them off in the oven. You can just put them on a baking sheet, bring the oven up to about 200, and just let them sit and dry. So we're just going to deseed the last few tomatoes here, and then I'll show you how I dry them. Look at all of the juice that we removed. That is a lot of moisture. So that would take a long time to dry. It's all done by evaporation, so we're really speeding things up. And for me, another big thing is that flavor. I really don't like that raw tomato flavor, and this removes a lot of that. You just get the sweetness, and they end up tasting like raisins or cherries, just some kind of sweet, fruity, delicious, chewy goodness. So now these are drained, they're relatively dry, and these are all ready to go out in the sun. Now the most important thing besides the heat and the humidity is keeping them free of bugs. I'm actually going to be covering these up with window screens. You can use anything really, from paper towel to cheesecloth, but with a really large batch like this, 2 little window screens sandwiched together creates a little reservoir for the tomatoes. They actually fit right inside because there's a little recession here and another little one up under here. So I sandwich them together, keeps them free of the bugs, keeps them nice and warm because this black color really absorbs the heat, and they breathe incredibly well because of the screens. So this is a perfect little method. Now, when we load up our window screen, I like to flip them over so they're facing up. That'll help the sun dry out any moisture left over. And it's a lot easier to penetrate down in here than it is to penetrate through the skin. I've attempted scoring the skin. I've done experiments with removing the skin. But I find that as long as you have nice weather, this is all you need, is to put them face up. So we'll just cover them up, give them as much sun as possible. Being trapped in between these screens creates a little oven effect, and they actually dry out fairly well. I think this is an excellent way to reuse old window screens. but because there is a little gap, I'm going to try and clamp them together. So I'll just pop on a few clamps here and there, and that should be enough to seal the bugs out. Unless you have just full sun all day, you might need to move these around a bit. I've moved them up on the driveway, and then down in the garden, and then out back. So you may need to move them a couple times to really get that optimal heat. But if we take our paper towels, there is so much moisture, we can actually squeeze it out. So that's why we drain them face down on this paper towel. Once they're fully dry, they should look a little bit like these. They'll shrivel up quite a bit. Sometimes they'll curl on the edges, but they're really nice and chewy, nice and sweet, and super versatile. You can chop them up in a pasta. You can just snack on them as is. They have tons of flavor. They're super healthy for you. And it just concentrates and enhances that tomato flavor. When I was younger, I hated tomatoes. That raw tomato flavor was just gross. But I always liked sun-dried tomatoes. So if you've never enjoyed tomatoes and you want to give them a go in your garden, this is an excellent way to use them. So once they're done, I like to throw them in a bag and then keep them in the freezer. I tried preserving a batch in olive oil, and the oil didn't soak into the tomatoes, and the tomatoes did not impart that flavor on the oil. So this is what they look like after 2 days. I think the Romas are perfect. The cherry tomatoes need a little bit more time. So we're going to give these one more day, and if they're not done by then, I'll just put them in the oven at about 200 degrees until they're perfectly dry. And that's up to you how far you want to go. If you like them nice and chewy, you can keep a little moisture in there. But if you really want them preserved well, you can actually dry them down to where they're brittle enough to break into powder, which would be a really interesting way to use sun-dried tomatoes. I really want to try and let these dry out naturally so we preserve those enzymes and those beneficial bacteria. That's one of the greatest benefits about doing this out in sun. You actually keep those enzymes and things alive, whereas in the oven they're likely to die off. So not only are these very nutritious, but they're actually sort of a probiotic. So here they are at the end of the day, and I think they're perfect. Look at that beautiful pattern they get. They're absolutely gorgeous. So these sun-dried tomatoes are super flavorful, really nutritious, and pretty easy to do. So I hope you give this a go in your garden. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.